In the previous lesson, we created a text on a gap layer in order to have a separate text object in our timeline. If that text object contains formatting I'd like to reuse later in this project or even in another project, it would be helpful to save that text. I'm going to show you how to do that and how to re-edit a previously formatted text back into your timeline. Before I save the text, I'd like to think about where I'm going to save this text. If you remember from back in our media organization lesson, I talked about the difference between folders and libraries. And one of the advantages to creating a library was that whatever information was contained in that library, it made it an easy container for opening that information into another project. When I start creating titles, I like to save them into a clip library, and that becomes a sort of reference holding place for my titles. I can then, in a new project, go in and open this previous clip library of titles and be able to reuse those titles in this new project. So before I save this title, I'm going to come over to my media library. I'm going to right click and create new library. And I'm going to call this library titles. When you want to save a title from your timeline into your media library, what you are saving is this clip that has the title on top of it, which is again one of the reasons I wanted to create that title on a gap rather than on the clip itself. But if I simply grab this gap title and drag it to my clip library, it will actually remove it from the timeline. So I want to show you an important keyboard shortcut for taking a clip from your timeline and copying it into a clip library without removing it from the timeline. To do that, I'm going to hold down my Shift and Option key at the same time before I grab this clip, and then I'm going to grab this gap that has the title on it and bring it over and drop it on my titles clip library. I now have that title here in the clip library, but it still exists in my timeline as well. Now that I have this title in my library, I'm going to click on its name and rename it as lower third. You could, of course, rename it whatever you'd like in order to know what you're reusing later on. When I would like to later reuse this title, I just need to edit it into the timeline as a clip. In the process of saving this title to my clip library, it also opened that clip into my source monitor. I'm going to edit this clip on top of the second clip in our timeline. So I'm going to place my playhead over that second clip in the timeline and use the same trick we did before. I will select the clip and click Shift V to cut the piece of gap above it and select that gap. I'm now going to show you two typical methods for editing that text into your timeline. For the first method, I'm going to use the shortcut X to mark ins and outs around this gap. And then with that focuser still in that second layer where that gap is, I use F10 to overwrite that title into the timeline. For our other method, I'm going to use a different edit type. First, I'm going to undo this overwrite to remove the title from the timeline. I'm going to also undo one more time to undo marking that in and out. There is another handy edit type you can use for titles that I like a lot. I also use this for editing graphics into my timeline. If I have a piece of gap and I'd like to edit something into it like a title or a still image, anything that's the same across every frame, I just want it to last for a certain amount of time. I can select that gap, and rather than marking any ins or outs, I can instead use what's called a fit to fill edit. This is something with video that we use to change the speed of the clip. But with a still image or still text, I can use that fit to fill to take that material and fill it into that gap. So I'll use fit to fill. Now watch what happens here. It immediately starts to render. Don't be alarmed by this. I can stop the render and the title will come down to the timeline. It just isn't rendered yet, but that's okay. So we've looked at saving those title clips into their own clip library and then reusing them by editing them back into the timeline using either the overwrite or the fit to fill. In the next lesson, we're going to take a look at 3D text inside of the action module.